Hello and welcome back to Wrongmar. In today's SPHE lesson, we're taking one final look at Fairtrade. Our Walt for today's lesson is to explore some actions that we can take to support Fairtrade farmers around the world. We've learned a lot over the last few lessons about how trade works, how Fairtrade works, and where some of our food comes from. But how much does it actually affect you? Let's say you were sitting down for breakfast in the morning and you take out all of your favourite things to eat and drink for breakfast. How many of those items are produced in Ireland? And how many of them come from other countries? Well, take a look at these popular breakfast foods and drinks. See if you can sort these into foods that are produced in Ireland and foods that are made in other countries. Pause the video and see if you can sort them. Well, how did you get on? Things like honey, eggs, rashers, sausages, yogurts, milk and bread are all produced in Ireland, so you'd still be able to have them even if we didn't trade with anyone else. But things like bananas and grapes, your baked beans, your tea and coffee, your orange juice, and even the rice that makes your Rice Krispies and Cocoa Pops. All of these things are produced in other countries and brought into Ireland through trade. We depend a lot on farmers in other countries to grow the foods that we like to eat, because our climate just won't let us grow them. In the last lesson, we learned that some foods are traded through a system called Fairtrade, and others are not. How would you explain Fairtrade to somebody who's never heard of it before? Pause the video and write down 1 or 2 sentences that explains what Fairtrade is. Well, let's remind ourselves very quickly how non-Fairtrade works. So in non-Fairtrade situations, big companies from rich Western countries usually decide how much they're going to pay the farmers in the poorer developing countries. These are the farmers who do all the hard work growing the crops. These big rich companies have a lot of power because they control the money. Most of the time, these big companies pay the farmers as little as possible. Often, this isn't even enough for the farmer to live and feed his family on. The farmer is stuck because there's nobody else to sell his crops to. He'll never earn enough money to get a better job or to send his kids to school. Big companies, on the other hand, earn lots and lots of money by selling the crops at a higher price in the richer countries. People, like me and you, in these developed countries, we like buying these cheap products, not realizing, or maybe choosing not to think about, the poor farmer who actually grew the crop. But in the last lesson, we learned that there is an alternative: fair trade. This is how it works. Farmers join together to work on bigger farms. This gives them more control over the price they want to sell their crops for. The farmers agree a minimum price, so they know that they're going to get a fair amount of money when they sell them. Together, the farmers decide how they're going to spend this extra money that they're getting. They might choose to build water pumps, maybe build a school, or build extra housing where they live. When their crops finally get to the supermarket, they are a bit more expensive for people like you and me, but at least we know that the farmers are getting paid fairly when we see the Fairtrade logo. Some people, like Fred here, disagree.
The world's not going to change just because I buy some Fairtrade bananas. I'd rather buy the cheap ones.
What do you think about that? What would you say to Fred if he said this to you? Pause the video and write down an answer. Sometimes, when we look at big world problems like this, it can feel like they're too big for us to solve. It can feel like nothing we do is going to solve the problem, and that we're so small anything we do is still going to have no effect. When we go shopping, it's easy to just pick up whatever we need from the shelf and not really think about where it came from or who had to work hard to grow it. But buying fair trade products really has a huge effect on the workers, on their families, and on the places where they live. If more and more people choose to buy fair trade, then more and more of these farmers and growers will be able to have a better life. If everyone in the world started to buy fair trade products only and said, no, I'm not buying any more non-fair trade products, those big companies that don't pay their workers fairly have no choice but to change the way that they're doing business. If they don't, they won't make any money. Nobody would buy their products. Think of all those farmers and workers who are living difficult lives because they're not getting paid fairly. And just imagine how many we could help if fair trade was the only way. It's everybody's job to try and fix this. You think of any ways that you, personally, could help improve the lives of these farmers around the world? Pause the video and see if you can think of one or two ways. Well, what did you come up with? Even though you personally might not get to choose which type of bananas you buy or which type of coffee your parents drink, there are still lots of different actions you can take to help fair trade farmers around the world. Let's take a look at 3 very real actions that we can take that won't cost a huge amount of money to anybody. The first thing you could do is you could plan a fundraising event in school or in your area. Maybe you could have a bake sale using fair trade ingredients to show people how tasty they are. Or maybe you could have a fancy dress day or a non-uniform day in school and raise money to give to fair trade charities. There are lots of different ideas for fundraising. I'm sure you'd be able to think of some much better ideas than this. Another thing that you could do is you could write a letter. There's lots of people you could write a letter to try and get them to change the way they are behaving. You could write a letter to a local cafe and ask them if they're using fair trade tea and coffee. Or you could write to a supermarket and ask them if they could maybe sell more fair trade goods in their store. Or you could write a letter to the principal and teachers in your school and ask them to only use fair trade tea and coffee in the staff room. There's lots and lots of other people you could write letters to, and letters are a really powerful way to get people to stop and think about what they're doing. The third and final way that you can make a difference to the fair trade movement is by being a teacher. Now, I'm not suggesting you take my job, I still need that, but lots of adults don't actually know much about fair trade. It's a pretty new thing, and we wouldn't have learned about it when we were younger. You now know lots about fair trade, so you can teach them about it. Which different ways could you do this? Pause the video and have a think. How would you be able to teach best? Well, maybe you could make a PowerPoint presentation or a video showing what fair trade is. Maybe you could make a poster or a leaflet and stick it up for people to read. Or maybe you could just talk to somebody about fair trade. Explain to them in your own words what it is and why it's a good idea. Even if you just change one person at a time, that will still make a difference to somebody in the world. So your job for today will be to plan a fair trade project, either in your home, for your school, or for your area. Try to think of different creative ways that you could teach people about fair trade and encourage them to only buy fair trade products. I can't wait to see what you come up with. So our waltz for today's lesson was to explore some actions that we can take to support fair trade farmers. You're ready to do that now. That's all we have time for today. Until next time, take care.